I lost my marriage at 10:17 a.m., in front of 30 coworkers, without my wife ever showing her face. The man who did it didn't knock. He walked straight past the receptionist, ignored my assistant's protest, and stopped at my desk like he was there to repossess my life. Downtown Chicago. Glass walls. Open floor. My name etched on a frosted plaque I'd spent 15 years earning. Every head lifted. I knew who he was before he spoke. You don't survive corporate America without learning the posture of men sent to take something. Daniel Miller? He asked, already opening his briefcase. That's me, I said. I'm serving you on behalf of your wife. No lowered voice. No courtesy. This wasn't legal procedure, it was theater. He spread the papers across my desk carefully, making sure the letterhead was visible from the hallway. Illinois Family Court. Petition for dissolution. Emergency custody filing. Financial restraint motion. This is a filing for divorce, he said. My client is seeking full physical and legal custody of your children. The words hit hard, but I didn't flinch. I'd learned long ago that reacting was a luxury reserved for men with leverage. She's also requesting exclusive use of the marital home in Evanston. He continued, voice calm, rehearsed. And a temporary freeze on shared financial assets pending court review. Temporary. I glanced at the glass wall. My team pretended to work. One analyst stared too long. My assistant froze near the printer, eyes wide. By lunch, the rumor would be alive. By evening, my reputation would be dissected by people who'd never asked a single question. Humiliation was the point. You'll be required to vacate the residence within 30 days, the lawyer said. Failure to comply will reflect poorly on you in court. I nodded once. That unsettled him. Men usually panic here. Argue. But threaten. I did none of it. I leaned back in my chair and folded my hands like I was listening to quarterly projections. Do you have legal representation? He asked. Yes, I said. Then you understand the seriousness of... I opened my desk drawer and slid a sealed manila envelope across the desk. The motion was slow. Deliberate. His eyes dropped to it immediately. What's this? He asked. Something you'll want to read, I said, before advising your client. He hesitated, studied my face. The confidence he walked in with didn't vanish, but it cracked. I'll review it, he said. Now, I replied. Against his instincts, he opened the envelope. I watched the color drain from his face as he skimmed the first page. Then the second. By the third, his jaw tightened, and he stopped reading altogether. He cleared his throat. Be in touch. He gathered his papers, too quickly now, stuffed the envelope back into his briefcase, and walked out without another word. The door shut. The silence afterward felt heavier than the confrontation itself. I sat there, listening to the low hum of servers and the distant city noise bleeding through the windows. My heart was steady. My hands didn't shake. My phone buzzed. A text from my wife. Please don't make this ugly. 14 years of marriage, and that was all she had to say. I didn't reply. 14 years ago, I was a different man. Newly married, hungry, willing to stay late, travel nonstop, miss birthdays if it meant stability. Somewhere along the way, providing turned into disappearing. Reliability became predictability. Silence became weakness. She thought I was passive. She didn't see the nights I stayed awake reviewing bank statements that didn't add up. The calls she took in the garage. The explanations that never quite landed. I never accused her. I verified. Quietly. Carefully. Because accusations destroy families when you're wrong. And patience destroys lies when you're right. I stood and looked out through the glass wall at my team. They trusted me. Followed me. Thought they knew me as steady, boring, safe. They had no idea what had just started. I grabbed my jacket and headed for the elevator. The ride down felt longer than usual. My phone buzzed again. A known number. I let it ring. Some conversations are better had after panic sets in. Outside, Chicago moved the way it always does. Horns blaring, people colliding, lives unraveling without apology. I stepped into it knowing one thing for certain. My wife didn't send a lawyer because she was done. She sent him because she thought I was powerless. By the end of the day, she'd learn how wrong that was. By the time I pulled into the driveway that night, the house already felt like it didn't belong to me. The porch light was on. Always was. A small thing, but it used to mean something. You're expected, you're welcome. That evening, it felt more like a spotlight. I sat in the car for a moment, engine ticking as it cooled, hands resting on the steering wheel. Downtown Chicago still rang in my ears, the lawyer's voice, the hush of the office, the way 30 people learned my marriage was over before I'd even accepted it myself. Inside the house, the kids' backpacks were lined up by the door. Shoes scattered the way they always were. Proof that life had continued its routine without asking how I was holding up. I stepped inside quietly. She was in the kitchen, standing at the counter with her back to me, scrolling through her phone. Same posture I'd seen 1,000 times. Relaxed. Certain. Like the world had already agreed with her. You didn't answer my messages, she said without turning around. I was busy, I replied. That earned me a sharp exhale. Not anger, annoyance. The kind reserved for someone who refuses to play their part. This didn't need to happen the way it did, she said. I set my keys down slowly. You sent a lawyer to my office. She finally turned to face me. You weren't listening to me anymore. I almost laughed. For years, listening had been the only thing I did. She talked about her frustrations, her fears, her dreams. I listened. When she complained about money, I worked more. When she wanted stability, I gave up risk. When she wanted space, I stayed quiet. Listening had cost me promotions, friendships, pieces of myself I didn't realize were irreplaceable. But none of that counted. Listening, to her, meant obedience. You humiliated me, I said calmly. She crossed her arms. You humiliated yourself by letting things get this far. There was the sentence she'd been saving. I walked past her and poured myself a glass of water, my movements deliberate. I could feel the anger trying to rise, but I kept it down. Anger would only prove her right. What exactly do you think happened? I asked. She hesitated just for a second. You became distant. You stopped showing up emotionally. Everything was about work. About control. Control. I thought about the nights I slept on airplanes. The weekends I spent in hotel rooms staring at spreadsheets while other men were at their kids' soccer games. The promotions I turned down because they required relocating the family again. You think I did all that for control? I asked. She shrugged. You liked being needed. That one landed. Because part of it was true. I did like being needed. I liked knowing my sacrifices mattered. What I didn't realize was how quickly being needed turns into being taken for granted. I never thought you'd fight this, she said, quieter now. I'm not fighting, I replied. I'm responding. Her eyes narrowed. What does that mean? It means you don't know me as well as you think you do. That unsettled her. For a long time, she'd built her certainty on my predictability. I was the man who stayed calm, who didn't push back, who absorbed stress so she didn't have to. But predictability is only comforting until it stops benefiting you. The kids padded into the hallway then, sleepy-eyed, drawn by the tension they didn't understand. My son leaned against the wall. My daughter clutched her blanket. Are you guys mad? My daughter asked. I crouched down immediately. No. We're just talking. She nodded, unconvinced, and disappeared back toward their rooms. That moment cracked something in my wife's expression. Just briefly. Guilt maybe. Or fear. This is about what you think you found, isn't it? She asked. I looked at her then. Really looked. The woman I married was still there, somewhere. But layered over her was someone sharper. More defensive. Someone who'd convinced herself that whatever she was doing was justified because I'd failed first. I didn't think, she continued, you were paying attention anymore. I was, I said. I just wasn't speaking. Silence had always been my survival strategy. Growing up, keeping my head down was how I avoided conflict. In my career, it was how I listened more than I talked. In my marriage, it became the way I kept the peace. But peace built on silence rots. I gave you everything, she said suddenly, voice tight. I supported you. I stayed when things were hard. So did I I replied. She shook her head. You don't see it. You never see how much I carried. And maybe she did carry things. Emotional weight. Loneliness. Resentment. But carrying doesn't give you the right to crush someone else. I'm not your enemy, I said. But I won't be your scapegoat either. Her phone buzzed on the counter. She glanced at it instinctively, then froze. I didn't ask who it was. I already knew. That was the moment I understood something I'd avoided admitting for years. She didn't respect me because she never had to fear losing me. I was safe, reliable, always there. Until now. I'm going to sleep in the guest room, I said. She didn't stop me. As I lay there later, staring at the ceiling fan spinning slow circles in the dark, the day replayed itself in fragments. The lawyer. The envelope. Her surprise when I didn't collapse. She thought she knew me. She thought silence meant surrender. Tomorrow her family would start asking questions. Her certainty would start to crack. And for the first time in our marriage, I wasn't going to rush in to fix things. I closed my eyes, not with dread, but with resolve. Because the man she thought she knew was gone. And the one she was about to meet didn't disappear anymore. I didn't sleep much that night. The guest room was quiet, too quiet, filled with the weight of words unsaid and plans I hadn't yet revealed. I stared at the ceiling, listening to the city hum below my bedroom window. Somewhere, sirens, car horns, the muffled voice of a late-night diner employee echoing off the brick walls. Life going on indifferent. I sat up, pulled my laptop onto the bed, and opened the spreadsheet I'd been keeping quietly for months. Every transaction. Every unexplained withdrawal. Every time a phone call was taken behind closed doors or an envelope slipped into a bag without explanation. I had documented it all, not out of suspicion at first, but out of habit. Accounting was a comfort. Numbers didn't lie. I traced a series of transfers from joint accounts to locations that didn't make sense. Trips taken without announcement. Receipts that didn't match the stories. Nothing overtly criminal, nothing that screamed betrayal. Just patterns. Tiny, repeated inconsistencies that, when connected, painted a picture far more revealing than confrontation ever could. And then there were the emails, long threads she never intended me to see. Subtle, professional, polite on the surface. But beneath the veneer, a web of influence and persuasion aimed at undermining me, shaping a narrative without me noticing. I knew that tone. I'd read it in contracts, in negotiation emails. She was orchestrating a story where I was the villain. I leaned back, hands behind my head, and let the pieces fit together. The lawyer's visit wasn't impulsive. It wasn't rage. It was calculated. She had been planning this for months, maybe years, slowly eroding my standing, positioning herself to move decisively while I remained silent. Predictable. Compliant. Until that envelope changed everything. I took a deep breath and reminded myself why patience had always been my strategy. One wrong step, one emotional outburst, and the narrative would stick. Friends, colleagues, even my children might perceive me differently. I had to let it play out under my control. The envelope. That quiet weapon of truth. Not threat, not vengeance. Just clarity. Everything she assumed she had hidden carefully, verified slowly, documented discreetly. I hadn't acted rashly because I didn't need to. Power isn't loud. Morning came, gray light spilling over the skyline, and I moved through my routine like a man who had survived worse. Breakfast for the kids, school lunches packed with silent efficiency, small smiles exchanged without revealing the storm brewing beneath. They were oblivious to the tension, and that was the way it should be. Protection meant restraint. After dropping them off, I returned home and spent the day quietly, methodically, assembling files, cross-checking data, and preparing for the eventual confrontation. Every pattern, every discrepancy, every hidden truth would be revealed when timing demanded it. And timing, as always, was everything. I reflected on the irony. For years, I had been the reliable, dependable one. The man who carried the family's weight while ensuring the veneer of normalcy. That reliability had been weaponized against me, spun into justification for control and exclusion. And yet, all that patience, all that quiet observation, had left me armed with the insight she never suspected I possessed. The lawyer had delivered a challenge in plain sight, thinking it would destabilize me. Instead, it sharpened my focus. Every financial irregularity, every subtle manipulation, every hidden move now became pieces of a larger strategy. I began connecting dots between the trips she took, the accounts she managed, the promises she twisted. It was not just a personal betrayal, it was a pattern of deception, methodical, relentless. By mid-afternoon, I had mapped it all out. The spreadsheet now looked less like numbers and more like a blueprint, a network of intentions laid bare. I could predict her next steps, anticipate her arguments, even foresee her emotional reactions. For the first time in years, I felt a clarity that bordered on exhilaration. Not revenge, just understanding. Later, my phone rang. A known number. I didn't answer. Some calls, like some truths, are better revealed when the other side believes they are in control. I moved to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and let myself consider the inevitable questions. How far was she willing to go? How many allies did she quietly recruit? How much of the family's perception of me had she already shaped? And most importantly, how would I reveal what I had discovered? Preparation required silence. Observation required restraint. Knowledge required patience. Everything else, anger, confrontation, exposure, was a tool to be used only at the precise moment it would matter most. Evening came. The city lights blinked alive like tiny witnesses to the unfolding drama. I reviewed the files one last time, double-checked each entry, and closed my laptop. The law, the numbers, the facts, they were all aligned. Ready. Waiting. The envelope had been delivered. The pieces were falling into place. And the man she thought she knew, the compliant, silent husband, was about to become someone entirely different. Someone she had underestimated for too long. I lay down that night, exhausted but alert, knowing that tomorrow, the quiet investigation would shift from observation to revelation. Every misstep she had counted on me to make, every assumption she had relied upon, would crumble under the weight of preparation. And when that moment came, it would not be loud. It would be precise. And it would be irreversible. The morning light in Evanston never looked the same after the lawyer's visit. I drove past the quiet streets, familiar faces waving to neighbors, oblivious to the war unfolding behind closed doors. I had a schedule to maintain, appearances to uphold, but inside, everything had shifted. By the time I arrived at my office, the first emails had already come in, cryptic, probing, small ripples designed to unsettle me. They weren't threats, exactly, but the kind of passive-aggressive notes a skilled manipulator sends. Questions about my availability, veiled comments about the children, hints at decisions she had already made. Each one confirmed what I had suspected. She was building a narrative, and the law wasn't the only weapon. I opened my laptop, scanned the files from the previous day, and made notes. Every financial discrepancy, every hidden transaction, every email and calendar anomaly now coalesced into a story. A story she had been shaping for months, trying to define me as careless, absent, unreliable. I hadn't reacted, I had recorded, tracked, and verified. Patience had become my ally. Around 11 a.m., my phone buzzed. An unknown number. I didn't answer, but the vibration was a small thrill. Each attempt to probe, each effort to unsettle me, only reminded me that I was no longer the man who reacted out of fear. During lunch, I walked along Michigan Avenue, coffee in hand, observing. People laughed, argued, lived. Life went on while my own had been disrupted in a single morning. I watched a father juggling groceries and a stroller and felt a quiet surge of clarity. The stakes were higher than pride or anger. My children's understanding of me, the man they had grown up with, was at risk. And I wasn't going to let someone rewrite that story. Back at home that evening, my wife tried to engage me with casual conversation, asking about my day, slipping in comments about the lawyer's letter. I responded with calm, neutral answers, each word chosen to avoid giving away the scope of what I had uncovered. She sensed it, I knew she did. The micro-expressions, the hesitation in her tone, they were tiny cracks, subtle but telling. Later, I found myself in my study, cross-referencing bank statements with calendar entries and travel receipts. Patterns emerged. Trips taken without mention, accounts drained quietly, promises made and ignored. Each revelation wasn't explosive, but together they built a lattice of intent. I traced it carefully, ensuring that nothing could be dismissed as coincidence. At dinner, the kids laughed over homework and homework fights. My wife's tone shifted occasionally, defensive when I corrected minor inaccuracies in their schedules or pointed out logistical issues she had overlooked. I noted the tension without comment, letting it sit in the room like a quiet storm. She couldn't see it, but I could. The control she had assumed was hers alone was starting to slip. I retired to the guest room again, laptop open, files spread across the bed. Each piece of evidence, each observation, each connection was cataloged. This wasn't about revenge, it was about clarity, about presenting the truth in a way that left no room for misinterpretation. The envelope I had delivered to the lawyer was only the beginning. What came next had to be precise. Late into the night, I reviewed every interaction from the previous days. The lawyer's visit, the hushed office whispers, her phone calls, her subtle manipulations. Everything pointed to one conclusion: she underestimated me. She thought silence was surrender, patience was weakness, observation was indifference. She had been wrong at every step. I closed the laptop, took a deep breath, and stared at the ceiling. The city lights of Chicago and Evanston shimmered outside my window, indifferent witnesses to a man reclaiming his own narrative. She had tried to rewrite my story, to define me through absence, accusation, and manipulation. But the quiet investigation had revealed the truth. And the moment of revelation was approaching. As I drifted toward sleep, the final thought I carried was simple but powerful. The man she thought she knew was gone. And the one who remained would not be controlled, silenced, or underestimated again. By mid-morning, the tension in my home had become almost tangible. I could feel it in the way my wife moved through the kitchen, in the way the kids glanced nervously at her tone, in the subtle weight in the air that had replaced laughter with restraint. The envelope had been delivered, the lawyer informed, and now everything was in motion. I sat at the dining table with my laptop open, files organized, evidence double-checked. Each number, each transaction, each unexplained withdrawal was now more than data. It was a map of decisions, of manipulations, of calculated moves made against me. And I had anticipated them all. A knock on the front door broke the silence. I didn't flinch. It was her mother. She stepped in without waiting for an invitation, her expression a mix of concern and curiosity. The moment she saw me at the table, calm and composed, her eyes widened. "Daniel, what is going on?" she asked, voice quivering. "We heard from the lawyer." I gestured for her to sit. "Have a seat. I think it's time we had a conversation." She sat, stiffly, hands folded in her lap. I could see the hesitation, the fear. She expected panic, outrage, or defeat. What she got was quiet confidence. I opened the laptop and began to explain, carefully, slowly, showing the documented transactions, the email threads, the patterns she hadn't noticed. Each revelation was deliberate, like laying one tile at a time, building an undeniable structure. The grandmother's expression shifted from confusion to shock. Every inconsistency I revealed, every hidden truth I connected, weakened the narrative her daughter had carefully constructed. You knew all this?" she whispered. "I did," I said simply. I watched, I recorded, and I waited. Not to retaliate, but to ensure clarity. To make sure no one is misled. Her face paled. She glanced at her daughter, who had appeared in the doorway silently, watching, realizing that the story she had relied on to justify her actions was collapsing. This can't be right," my wife said finally, stepping fully into the room now. Her voice had a tremor that hadn't been there before. "It is," I replied. "Everything documented, verified, and ready to present. You built a narrative on assumptions and omissions. Now the truth is visible." She turned toward her mother, seeking validation, but the uncertainty in her mother's eyes left her unsupported. The alliance she had counted on was fractured. I watched the shift quietly. Control had moved. The envelope had been the opening move. The evidence and patient observation had been the second. Now, the weight of their realization, the first strike of truth, was enough to unsettle them. Her mother's lips trembled. How did you find all of this? I smiled faintly. I never stopped paying attention. The children peeked in from the hallway, sensing the unusual tension. I knelt down, meeting their eyes, grounding them. Everything's okay, I said. We're just talking about grown-up things. Nothing to worry about. Later, as the evening approached, my wife retreated to the living room, phone clutched in hand, making calls she didn't want me to hear. But I had already anticipated these steps. Each move she made was predictable, documented, and contained within the web of evidence I had meticulously assembled. For the first time in 14 years, I felt an unshakable clarity. Silence had served me well. Observation had been my ally. Patience, my strategy. And now, the first strike had landed. The cracks in her certainty, in her family's assumptions, had begun to show. As I prepared the kids for bed, I realized that this night would be remembered not for the conflict itself, but for the quiet precision with which truth had been revealed. The first strike was complete, and the balance had shifted irrevocably. The man she underestimated was no longer the silent observer. He was an active presence, calculated, unwavering, and in control. The morning started like any other, but nothing about this day would be ordinary. The air in the house was thick with unspoken tension. Every step I took, every glance I exchanged with the kids, was measured. Patience had carried me this far, but now action was necessary. By 9 a.m., the phone was ringing nonstop. Unknown numbers, blocked numbers, and one persistent caller, the lawyer. My wife had already started mobilizing, calling family, friends, even colleagues, hoping to pressure me into compliance. But I stayed calm. I knew the patterns. I had anticipated the panic. And I was ready. I opened my laptop and reviewed the files again. Every financial discrepancy, every hidden email, every irregular transaction was ready for presentation. Each point connected with precision, leaving no room for misinterpretation. The envelope, the documentation, the patient observation, it had all led to this moment. The doorbell rang. I walked to the front door, opened it, and found her brother standing there, his expression tight, wary. He had been briefed, I assumed, or perhaps he had begun to notice the inconsistencies himself. "We need to talk," he said, voice low. I gestured for him to come in. "Then let's talk." We sat in the living room. I didn't need to speak first. He tried, stumbling over questions, hesitant accusations. Each one was addressed calmly, factually, and without emotion. He realized quickly that there was no narrative he could twist to fit his assumptions. He was witnessing clarity, the truth laid bare. By noon, the lawyer arrived. My wife followed reluctantly. I invited them to sit. The room was quiet, but I could feel the weight shifting. My calm, deliberate presence contrasted sharply with the uncertainty radiating from them. I began to speak, walking them through every piece of evidence. Numbers, emails, hidden transactions, patterns of behavior. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't plead. I just presented the facts, connecting dots with careful precision. Each revelation chipped away at the story she had constructed. Each documented truth undermined the assumptions of her lawyer, her family, even her own confidence. My wife's face tightened with every sentence. She opened her mouth, attempted explanations, but the clarity was undeniable. Every argument she offered was either contradicted by the evidence or rendered irrelevant by the timing and documentation. At one point, she whispered to her lawyer, clearly desperate, He has everything." He nodded slowly, understanding that the first strike had escalated into an irreversible turning point. I didn't need to add anything. Silence was as powerful as the documentation itself. By late afternoon, the room was subdued. Her mother had called several times, apologetic, confused, shocked. Her brother had left, weighed down by the clarity of what he had witnessed. My wife sat, drained, realizing that the narrative she had relied on for justification was crumbling around her. I took a deep breath, knowing that the turning point had been reached. This was the moment where patience met action, where observation became strategy, and where the silent husband transformed into an undeniable presence. The power balance had shifted irrevocably. The kids came home that evening, unaware of the full scope of what had happened. I met them with a calm, reassuring smile, grounding them. Life for them remained stable, and that stability had been preserved because I had controlled every move, every disclosure, every moment. As night fell, I sat in the study, reviewing the day's events. The lawyer had left, my wife had retreated to the living room, and I finally allowed myself a moment to reflect. The first strike had revealed the cracks. The turning point had shifted the balance. And yet, the climax, the final confrontation where all truths would be fully revealed and decisions would be irreversible, was still ahead. For the first time in years, I felt a profound clarity. Patience had brought me here. Observation had guided me. Now, action had cemented my position. The man she thought she controlled no longer existed. And the man who remained was fully prepared for the reckoning that was to come. The house felt smaller that morning, tighter somehow, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. I had already anticipated every move she could make, but anticipation could only carry you so far. The final confrontation required presence, clarity, and precision. She arrived in the living room first, her posture tense, phone clutched like a shield. Her mother lingered in the kitchen doorway, eyes darting between us, silently pleading for calm. My children were still at school, mercifully unaware that today would redefine everything. I opened the envelope again, not the one sent to the lawyer, but a duplicate I had kept for myself. It contained everything, meticulously organized, every thread of evidence and observation linked together. It was more than documentation, it was a narrative she could not dispute. Her lawyer followed closely behind her, confident at first, then hesitant, reading my calm, measured demeanor and realizing that the story he had assumed would be one-sided was, in fact, mine to tell. I gestured for her to sit. She hesitated, then reluctantly lowered herself into the couch, phone set aside. Silence hung between us, heavy, demanding. I began speaking, first calmly, then with measured force, walking through each inconsistency, each hidden transaction, each subtle manipulation I had observed. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I simply laid the facts bare, letting the truth stand on its own. Her expressions shifted rapidly, defensiveness, disbelief, panic, realization. Her mother edged closer, witnessing the unraveling with astonishment. Even the lawyer, trained to navigate conflict and spin stories, could only nod, realizing that the narrative he had relied upon was collapsing in real time. Everything you've assumed, everything you've relied upon, has been verified, documented, and observed, I said quietly, yet with unmistakable authority. Patience, observation, and precision have guided every move. You underestimated me. That ends today. Her voice trembled. You can't? This isn't fair. Fairness isn't the point, I replied. Clarity is. Truth is. The children deserve honesty. You built your story on omissions and assumptions. Now you have the choice to acknowledge it or watch it collapse. She glanced at her lawyer, pleading silently for intervention, but the evidence was undeniable. The balance had shifted irreversibly. Her mother finally stepped forward, whispering, "Daniel, we had no idea?" I nodded once. "And now you do." The tension broke not with shouting, but with comprehension. Her husband's manipulation, her own confidence, the assumptions of family allies, all fell away in the weight of truth. The narrative had changed, irrevocably. The man she thought she controlled had been replaced by someone alert, deliberate, and fully in command. Minutes stretched, the silence punctuated only by the occasional sighs and murmurs of realization. By the time my children arrived home, the room had transformed from a battlefield into a space of sober understanding. The power dynamic had shifted, and everyone present recognized it. Later that evening, as I sat in my study, the city lights casting long shadows across the room, I reflected on the day. The climax had been reached not through anger or impulsive confrontation, but through preparation, observation, and measured action. The first strike, the turning point, and now the culmination had all aligned to create clarity. For the first time in years, I felt unshakable. Patience had given me insight, restraint had given me strategy, and now action had solidified the truth. The man she underestimated had reclaimed control, and the consequences of misjudging him were finally clear. The envelope, the files, the observations, all had served their purpose. The climax had arrived, and with it, the undeniable fact: I was no longer the man to be overlooked, silenced, or underestimated. The morning after the climax, the house was quiet in a way that felt almost foreign. No tension hung in the air, no unspoken words loomed. I moved through my morning routine with calm precision, coffee in hand, the kids' laughter echoing from their rooms, grounding me in the reality that had always mattered most. My wife didn't speak much. She moved through the house with a subdued demeanor, a shadow of the confidence she had carried before the truth came to light. Her mother offered apologetic glances, her brother remained distant but aware of the shift. Everyone was recalibrating, processing the revelation that had changed the narrative entirely. I sat at the dining table, reviewing a final set of files one last time, not for evidence, but to remind myself that preparation, patience, and clarity had led to this moment. The envelope, the meticulous tracking, the observations, all had served their purpose. The confrontation had been precise, the outcome undeniable, and now it was time to consider the future. The kids bounded into the kitchen, playful and oblivious to the emotional storms that had passed. I knelt to their level, smiling, joking, guiding them through breakfast. Life for them would continue with stability, not chaos. That was my priority always. Later, my wife approached me, her tone tentative. "I didn't realize," she began, but I held up a hand gently. "No explanations necessary," I said. "We both know the truth now. That's what matters." She nodded, quietly accepting the moment, and turned away. The tension between us hadn't vanished overnight, but a foundation of clarity had replaced deceit and assumption. Respect had been re-established, even if grudgingly. I reflected on the journey, the first strike, the turning point, the climax, and understood that the true victory wasn't in exposing deception or winning arguments. It was in reclaiming authority over my own life, in asserting presence, and in ensuring that truth, not assumption, guided the path forward. As evening settled over Chicago, I sat by the window, watching the skyline light up. The city moved, indifferent yet alive, and for the first time in a long while, I felt aligned with my own narrative. Silence had taught me patience. Observation had given me insight. Measured action had restored balance. By nightfall, her family had called multiple times, concerned, tearful, asking how I uncovered what they hadn't. I remained calm, allowing the truth to speak for itself. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The impact had been felt, the lessons learned, and the equilibrium restored. The man who had been underestimated for 14 years was no longer silent, no longer compliant, no longer unseen. I closed my laptop, the city lights reflecting on the glass, and finally allowed myself to exhale. The storm had passed. The house, the children, my life, they were intact, guided now by clarity, truth, and measured resolve. And for the first time in years, I felt not only powerful but free.